Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through the moonlit shadows of a place you've probably only seen in epic dramas, the endless labyrinthine corridors of the ancient Chinese palace. Soft lanterns flicker on red lacquered columns, silk slippers glide noiselessly over polished stone, and every whisper in the darkness could be a secret that decides an empire's fate. You can almost taste the chill of the morning mist on your tongue, smell the faint incense that clings to embroidered sleeves, and feel the nervous flutter of your heart as you take those first tentative steps from obscurity toward unimaginable power. Every glance is measured, every smile loaded with meaning. Welcome to the world of palace intrigue, where ambition and survival move hand in hand, and where you tonight are about to discover just how far a clever girl can rise. Of course, before you get too comfortable, a little reality check. You probably won't survive this. In fact, most of the hopefuls who dream of the imperial throne end up with a story nobody wants to tell at dinner. But hey, that's the charm of history, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past the palace guards, bowing low, because posture is a language here, and one misstep could mean the difference between invitation and exile. In the outskirts of a prosperous Chinese dynasty, you are not born royal. You're the daughter of a scholar, a merchant, or maybe even a minor court official, whose ambitions are nearly as polished as the marble floors. From your earliest days, you're taught that obedience and cleverness go hand in hand. You're schooled in poetry, calligraphy, and the subtle art of reading a room faster than a summer storm changes direction. But all that learning is just the prologue. The true test comes as your family quietly begins to angle for your entry into the imperial court. A chance for upward mobility that's equal parts honor and pure terror. To even be noticed, you'll need more than good manners. Maybe it's your legendary embroidery skills, or the way your couplets charm even the most jaded auntie at family gatherings. Maybe it's the rumor, carefully seeded by your mother, that your birth date is blessed by the stars. Historians still argue whether fate or family ambition did more to determine who actually made it inside those jade doors. The day comes, you're summoned along with dozens, sometimes hundreds of other hopeful girls into the outer palace, where every movement is watched by sharp-eyed eunuchs and even sharper-tongued court ladies. You exchange anxious glances, hoping no one notices your trembling hands. There's a certain energy in the air, a blend of fear, excitement, and the realization that here, a single clever gesture or perfectly timed compliment might change your life forever. Mainstream historical fact: in many dynasties, the selection of palace women, including potential empresses, was an organized, often annual event. Young women from noble and influential families would be presented at court, assessed for beauty, talent, health, and just as important, political usefulness. Some left the selection room in tears, never to return. Others, the lucky or unlucky few, found themselves with a new title, a new wardrobe, and a life sentence of watching their back. Among the crowd, you notice the rivalries already budding, silent hierarchies forming over borrowed jewelry, and who gets the shadiest spot in the waiting room. Fringe tidbit: some families resorted to extraordinary lengths to boost their daughters' chances, hiring professional fortune adjusters to charm the stars or bribe a well-placed servant with a particularly rare tea. The palace is a place where everyone has an angle, and sometimes a cousin who knows a guy. But your main weapon, in the end, is your mind. While other girls fret over rouge and hairpins, you remember your grandmother's advice. Listen more than you speak, notice what others miss, and never ever forget that every ally could become a rival by sunrise. Historians still argue whether women's influence in the palace was truly behind the scenes, or if, quietly, the smartest empresses were always pulling the strings right in front of everyone's noses. So you wait heart hammering in your chest as the palace doors swing wider. You're about to be seen, measured, and, if fate allows, chosen. Whether you end up as a humble lady in waiting, a favourite concubine, or the empress herself depends on 1,000 details, most of which you can't control. But in this world, simply surviving another day in the palace is an achievement all its own. You take a deep breath, steady your hands, and prepare for the first step in a journey that just may change history. If you can survive the glances, the gossip, and the poison, literal or otherwise, you might just find yourself not only in the palace, but at the very heart of the empire. You stand nervously in the outer hall, feet barely visible beneath silk slippers, as the excitement of selection day builds around you. You're surrounded by a blur of colours, girls in crimson, jade, and sky blue robes, each clutching a talisman or embroidered handkerchief for luck. Everyone pretends composure, but every flutter of a fan or sideways glance betrays the deep collective anxiety. After all, this is no ordinary coming-of-age ceremony. It's the day the emperor's court will decide who is worthy to cross the next threshold, and possibly, just possibly, become the woman beside the dragon throne. The process is equal parts drama and farce. You shuffle forward as your name is called, making sure your feet don't slip on the polished tiles. A misstep here could haunt your reputation for years. Selection day is an elaborate audition, with rituals drawn from generations of dynastic custom. Ministers, eunuchs, and senior ladies, each armed with an intimidating scroll or a disapproving eyebrow, form a living gauntlet. One by one, hopefuls are sized up for grace, posture, and that mysterious quality the palace calls auspiciousness. Historians still argue whether the criteria were truly about virtue and beauty, or if behind-the-scenes politics and family bribes carried the most weight. You focus on the basics, stand straight, speak softly, and don't faint when the Grand Chamberlain lifts your chin for a better look. There's a quick examination, hands for calluses, teeth for health, hair for shine. A minor cold can dash your hopes. An errant freckle might be seen as a bad omen. Mainstream historical fact. The inspection process was genuinely intense, sometimes lasting days, with a reputation for being both thorough and humiliating. Royal matchmakers once famously rejected a candidate for sneezing at the wrong moment, setting off a round of superstitious panic about inopportune wins. Meanwhile, you're keenly aware that selection day is also the scene of 100 minor dramas. One girl's slipper slips off with a loud thwack, and she nearly trips into the arms of a mortified courtier. Another, so pale with nerves she looks like a ghost, manages only a croak when asked to recite poetry. There's always that one family that whispers, "The emperor prefers musicians," prompting a parade of impromptu zither solos in the corner. The whispers, the superstitions, the petty sabotage. It's a spectacle worthy of its own palace opera. Your family, clustered anxiously near the entrance, tries to project calm. Your mother murmurs a quick blessing, then checks your sash for the 10th time. You catch a glimpse of another hopeful's father, arguing quietly with a palace official, slipping what looks suspiciously like a silk pouch into his sleeve. Fringe tidbit: in some dynasties, rumours spread that certain colours or flower motifs brought better luck. This year's must-have is a hairpin shaped like a peony, which means the local goldsmith is probably working overtime. In the waiting room, nerves fray as the morning stretches on. Some girls huddle together for comfort, while others stake out territory with icy glares. There's a subtle contest in who can look the most unbothered, the most perfectly serene. One hopeful manages to nap in her chair, earning envious glances from those too anxious even to blink. You realize with a small, wry smile that the palace isn't just selecting an empress, it's selecting who can handle unending scrutiny with the least amount of sweat. Suddenly your turn comes. You bow, present your name, and manage miraculously not to drop your fan. The examiner's gaze is sharp but not unkind. You answer the ritual questions, each more obscure than the last. What was the favorite dish of a legendary empress? What's the auspicious time for a winter wedding? You answer as best you can, balancing truth with just a dash of creative storytelling. Historians still debate whether the best liars or the most honest applicants fared better in these high-stakes auditions. When your name is read as one of those advancing to the next round, your knees nearly buckle with relief. You join a smaller group led deeper into the palace, leaving behind the whispers, the tears, and for a lucky few, the first taste of true hope. But for those who stumble or fail, a discreet attendant gently escorts them out. No fanfare, no consolation, just a swift return to the quiet world outside the palace walls. As evening falls, you feel the exhaustion of survival and the buzz of possibility. The real tests, you sense, have only just begun. Somewhere in the shadows, alliances are already forming and rivals sharpening their smiles. For now, though, you allow yourself one fleeting moment of pride. Your silk slippers, still spotless, step forward onto a new path, however treacherous it may prove. You step over the high threshold, heart pounding, as the iron-banded palace gates close with a sound like thunder behind you. Entering the Forbidden City isn't just walking into a building, it's vanishing into another universe, a world so steeped in protocol, luxury, and peril that the very air feels heavier. The sky above is always a little paler inside these walls, as if sunlight itself has to get permission from a eunuch before it can shine on imperial tiles. The first thing you notice is the scale. Everything is vast. Halls that echo with the footsteps of 1,000 generations. Gardens where a single flower out of place can cause scandal. Courtyards so enormous that pigeons could get lost in the maze of stone and gold. And yet you move through these spaces with a strange sense of invisibility. Just one among dozens of newcomers herded through the ceremonial gates. No one looks directly at you. The officials and senior palace women have perfected the art of seeing without seeing, of making a new arrival feel at once scrutinized and utterly inconsequential. Mainstream historical fact: the Forbidden City, at the height of its glory, housed not just the emperor and his family, but thousands of officials, artisans, guards, and most importantly for you, hundreds of women chosen to serve the imperial family in various ranks. The emperor's harem itself was a dizzying hierarchy, from the empress at the top down to junior maids, all subject to rules so intricate that forgetting how to bow in the wrong hall could end your ambitions before they began. Historians still argue whether the architecture was designed to impress or intimidate, or if it was simply the physical embodiment of the emperor's unreachable authority. The daily routine inside the palace is a blur of lessons and rehearsals. You learn how to walk with exactly the right amount of grace, arms not too close, not too far, how to kneel and rise without making a sound, how to smile politely at a joke you barely understand. Your instructors are merciless. A single mispronounced phrase in your court greeting draws a thinly veiled frown from a senior attendant. You are taught which corridors to avoid, which pavilions belong to which concubine, and which doorways are watched more closely than others. Fringe tidbit: rumor has it there's a secret code to navigating the labyrinth. Certain mosaic stones, slightly paler than the rest, guide the observant through safe passage. You decide not to test that theory just yet. Meals are formal, served on porcelain, so delicate you're terrified to touch it. The food, while plentiful, is mostly cold by the time it reaches you. Every dish, you're told, must be tasted by an official taster, since poison is a constant worry. There's a running joke among junior attendants that if the fish ever tastes especially fresh, you should be suspicious. It means someone in the kitchens is either very bold or very new. One morning, you watch as a senior lady calmly removes a single lotus seed from her bowl and sets it aside. Later, you overhear that lotus seeds are sometimes considered unlucky in certain contexts. You add it to your growing list of palace survival notes. But for all the grandeur, the loneliness seeps in quickly. The palace is always full, yet profoundly empty. You miss the raucous laughter of your siblings, the scent of your mother's favorite hair oil, even the predictable grumbling of your father about taxes. Here voices are low, and friendships, if they form, are hedged with caution. Everyone is on edge, always watching, always aware that favor can shift with a single rumor. You notice that the older court women never walk alone. They move in pairs, or small groups, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Trust is rare. One day you find yourself laughing quietly at a joke from a fellow newcomer, only to have her glance nervously around before joining in. Historians still debate whether deep, genuine friendships ever flourished in the imperial harem, or if even the closest confidantes were always deep down competitors. At night you lie awake on a stiff, brocade-covered mat, staring at the elaborate woodwork above your head. Outside, the muffled footsteps of guards remind you that you are both privileged and imprisoned. Somewhere in the garden, a nightingale sings, its melody as lonely as you feel. You wonder what the future will bring: fortune, failure, or some strange blend of both. As the moon casts silver shadows through latticed windows, you finally drift into an uneasy sleep, hoping that tomorrow you'll remember all the right bows, all the right words, and maybe, just maybe, find one person you can trust in this breathtaking, bewildering, and very dangerous new world. Dawn creeps over the golden rooftops, casting the Forbidden City's endless maze of halls and courtyards in a glow that somehow makes everything feel even more surreal. You wake to the chime of bells, always too early, always just as you've drifted into the deepest part of sleep, and join the shuffling procession of attendants toward the Hall of Ceremonial Instruction. Today's lessons are the ones that really matter: how to survive the tangled web of etiquette, alliances, and rivalries that swirl like a silent storm around every corner. You move through a world where every gesture, every syllable, is a potential signal. A bow that's a hair too low can make you look desperate. Hold your fan at the wrong angle, and you might offend the wrong person before breakfast. You soon learn to speak in layers, complimenting the color of someone's robe while really hinting at your own skill with the needle, or praising a poem while making a sly joke about a rival's provincial accent. Mainstream historical fact: the palace was a court of masks, with intricate rules and shifting loyalties. Even the lowest-ranking maid learned to wield a double meaning as deftly as a courtier wielded a brush. The Empress herself is the model of composure. You glimpse her in the distance, a figure crowned with phoenix hairpins, moving with slow, deliberate grace. She smiles with just enough warmth to keep the peace, but never so much that anyone mistakes her for a friend. It's rumoured she can recall the family lineage of every maid and eunuch, and that she never forgets a slight, no matter how small. You remind yourself to memorize her favourite flowers, just in case you're ever called to arrange a vase in her chambers. Meanwhile, rivalries bloom beneath every polite exchange. You watch as two senior concubines compete for the emperor's attention at breakfast, each reciting poetry that's secretly a critique of the other's calligraphy. You see a lesser wife accidentally spill a cup of tea on her neighbour's silk sleeve, then apologize with a smile so sweet it could curdle milk.
There's an art to these encounters, a performance where everyone knows their role, but the script is rewritten by the hour.
Historians still argue whether the Empress wielded real power or was simply a puppet for the Emperor's wishes. Some claim that her authority was absolute within the inner court, shaping the lives of hundreds of women and deciding matters of discipline, ritual, and favor. Others believe that much of her power came from what she didn't say, from the subtle ways she fostered or crushed alliances with a raised eyebrow or a well-timed silence. For newcomers like you, the pressure to fit in is relentless. Your days are measured by rituals, presenting tea to senior women and noting who takes sugar, practicing bows so your sleeves fall just so, and mastering the language of court poetry, which frankly is more about veiled insults than literary merit.
There's always an undercurrent of nerves. You suspect even the palace cats know which eunuchs to avoid. Then there are the coded gifts.
Well, you watch as a cluster of younger attendants exchange tokens, jade hairpins, embroidered sachets, each loaded with meaning. A gift of a white silk handkerchief might mean, let's be allies. A pomegranate-shaped ornament could imply, may your luck split open like this fruit. Of course, if you give the wrong person a willow wood comb, you're wishing them change in a way that can only end badly. Fringe tidbits. Once, an entire spring festival was overshadowed because someone presented the Empress with a painting of magpies, a symbol of gossip, sparking weeks of whispered speculation and frantic apologies. Night brings no real respite. You lie in your chamber, listening to the muffled laughter and hurried footsteps in the corridor, wondering which friendships will survive until morning and which will dissolve with the next rumor. The pressure to say the right thing, to bow at the right time, to never let your guard slip. It's exhausting, and the stakes are life-altering. You find yourself composing clever, harmless jokes to deflect tension, the way your grandmother once taught you to whistle when you were afraid. Historians still debate whether all this etiquette protected women in the palace, or simply trapped them in a never-ending game of performance and pretense. Was friendship even possible, or did survival always come first? You suspect the answer is both, that beneath the mask small sparks of real kindness do exist, even if they're hidden behind layers of silk and protocol. As you drift off, you wonder, if you were to stumble in public tomorrow, who would laugh, and who would offer a helping hand? You resolve to watch, to listen, and above all, to never ever spill your tea on anyone's sleeve, no matter how tempting the opportunity might be. You wake to the hush of servants gliding past your door, already deep in the ritual of lighting incense and adjusting embroidered cushions for the day's audiences. You've learnt to recognize a hierarchy in even the quietest steps. Some are anxious, some brisk with confidence, but the most commanding are the footsteps of women who no longer serve but reign from the shadows, the Empress Dowagers. Retired but not removed, these women have survived every storm the palace can conjure and have become the secret architects of power, their influence stretching as far as any emperor's decree. You're summoned to an early morning gathering, where the dowager sits shrouded in layers of pale gold and moonlight silk, her hair coiled in a style that's already outlasted 3 dynasties of trends. Her voice is soft, never raised, and yet the hush it commands ripples through the room like the tremor before an earthquake. You watch as a junior attendant approaches to serve tea, hand trembling. The dowager gives a slight nod, nothing more, and the girl melts away, relieved to have survived the encounter unscathed. Mainstream historical fact. In many dynasties, especially during transitions or after an emperor's early death, the Empress Dowager ruled as regent, guiding policy, selecting new officials, and making decisions that would shape the empire for decades. Behind the silk screens, dowagers often dictated the pace and path of imperial succession, sometimes even advising the new emperor so thoroughly that their wishes became law. Historians still argue whether this influence was always benign, or whether some dowagers, intoxicated by their own survival, wielded power with a ruthlessness that rivaled the hardest generals. You listen closely to every word, aware that a casual phrase from the dowager can shift a courtier's fortunes overnight. There's a knack to understanding her true meaning. A compliment on your embroidery might be just that, or it might be a veiled request for a favor in return. Sometimes her stories about the importance of rain at harvest, or the dangers of wearing green on an unlucky day, are more like coded warnings than grandmotherly advice. You find yourself mentally cataloguing every topic she mentions, just in case you're asked to recite them.
What's most remarkable about these women is their ability to outlast enemies by making themselves indispensable. One legendary dowager denied official audiences, famously held court from her own quarters, receiving advisors and petitioners under the pretense of a casual luncheon. Within weeks, her salon became the true center of decision-making.
Another is said to have orchestrated a palace coup without ever leaving her embroidery table, sending trusted eunuchs to do her bidding. Fringe tidbit, it's whispered that a dowager's skill at flower arranging was less about art and more about sending secret signals to her allies. Chrysanthemums for caution, peonies for pushback, and plum blossoms for imminent change. You're astonished at how the younger empresses and concubines tiptoe around the dowager's moods, showering her with carefully selected gifts and flattery. No one dares to bring up past scandals directly, but the air is thick with illusion. The dowager's memory is as sharp as the emperor's sword. A single story from her lips can resurrect a forgotten debt, or erase a rival's hard-won reputation. Historians still debate whether the Empress Dowager's real power lay in her public role or her private networks, alliances with eunuchs, alliances with powerful families back home, or even relationships with court scholars who value her patronage more than any officials. You begin to suspect it's a combination of everything: the ability to read a room, the knack for never saying too much, and the patience to let enemies destroy themselves out of impatience or pride. You sit quietly, observing the intricate dance as officials bow, make their offerings, and retreat. The dowager barely moves, but her words shape the entire atmosphere. When the audience ends, you feel like you've survived a kind of spiritual weather, exhilarated and exhausted all at once. As you leave, you overhear two palace maids whispering that the dowager once faced exile, only to be brought back by popular demand. She knows everyone's secrets, one says, glancing around, and she's not done making history. You wonder what stories will be whispered about you if you ever reach her age and stature. That night, as you prepare for bed, you reflect on the quiet strength and subtlety required to last in the palace. The power of an empress dowager isn't in how loudly she speaks, but in how many people stop talking when she enters the room. Surviving the palace, you realize, means knowing when to bow, when to laugh, and when to simply listen, and knowing that sometimes the most powerful throne is the one set behind the curtain, far from the emperor's gaze. Before the sun has fully crested the palace walls, you're already shuffling through the painted corridors, clutching a bundle of silk. Another day, another summons, another lesson in how every birth within these walls can ripple across the empire. This morning, you join a group of anxious young women in the Empress's private garden, watching the careful ritual as a concubine, heavy with child, is escorted to the hall of auspicious blessings. Every servant knows the stakes. A healthy birth might elevate a mother's rank, trigger new alliances, or ignite the sort of palace intrigue that leaves courtiers sleepless for weeks. The air is thick with anticipation. In imperial China, motherhood is not just a personal milestone, it's a political earthquake. The birth of an imperial heir can make or break careers, shift the balance of power among rival families, and give an ambitious woman the rarest gift of all, a measure of protection. You find yourself remembering an old saying, "Heaven is high, but the Empress Dowager is near." In the nursery, that's never been more true. Mainstream historical fact: succession in the Chinese court was anything but simple. While the emperor could father dozens of children, only the sons of empresses, or high-ranking consorts, stood a real chance at the throne. For every favoured child, there were half a dozen rivals lurking, sometimes quite literally in the shadows. Scholars still debate whether succession was ever truly about merit, or if it was always the result of whispered deals and desperate gambles in the silk-draped corridors. You witness the subtle choreography as mothers position themselves and their children for imperial notice. Every gift for the emperor, every scroll of poetry read at a feast, every accidental meeting in the garden is carefully calculated. There's a rumor that the last time an emperor favored a poem about cranes, the author's mother rose 3 ranks overnight. You wonder if you should start brushing up on your bird metaphors, just in case. The emperor's interest is both a blessing and a curse. It means gifts, promotions, and a better room with actual windows. It also means every rival is watching your every move. In the shadows, alliances shift. You overhear a minor concubine offering to help another's child learn to play the zither, a suspiciously generous gesture, given the upcoming mid-autumn performance for the emperor. Fringe tidbit: one legendary consort reportedly hid her son's talent for years, only revealing his musical gifts after her chief rival was sent to a distant convent. As the months pass, you watch as mothers count not just their children's birthdays, but the emperor's shifting affections, the empress's subtle nods, and the dowager's cryptic praise. A son's first tooth is cause for celebration. A daughter's clever poem earns a tiny jade rabbit, each milestone another stone on the precarious path toward favour. And then there's the dreaded possibility of a royal pregnancy gone wrong. A miscarriage or stillbirth can end a career. Sometimes rumours of bad omens stick harder than the truth. The more superstitious believe the palace's ancient stones remember such tragedies, dooming future generations, unless the right rituals are performed. You watch as the senior nursemaid scatters rice and murmurs a prayer at every threshold. No one admits to believing, but no one dares skip it either. Historians still argue whether the endless jockeying for succession helped keep the imperial line strong, or simply guaranteed a state of perpetual tension. You see how the children, raised on formality and half-truths, turn into little diplomats before they can tie their own sashes. Some thrive, others grow wary or rebellious, and every mother learns to hope quietly and prepare for heartbreak. But in the quiet moments, away from prying eyes, you sometimes see genuine tenderness, a mother smoothing her son's hair, a father pausing to watch his daughters dance. The tiny rebellion of love in a world built on calculation. These are fleeting, precious, and carefully hidden, but they're real, and they remind you that for all the power at stake, the palace is still, somehow, a home. As dusk falls, you retreat from the nursery, the echo of lullabies and whispered hopes lingering in your ears. You marvel at how each birth, each new life, can send ripples through an empire that prizes order above all else. In a place where the next sunrise might bring a new heir or a new plot, your only real certainty is that everything can change with the cry of a newborn. Some mornings you can't help but marvel at the intricate choreography of the palace, the endless shuffle of slippers, the rustle of silk, and most mysterious of all, the quiet authority of the eunuchs. These men, neither quite insiders nor outsiders, carry keys to almost every secret door, and their loyalties can shift the fate of an empress with barely a whisper. You watch them glide through the halls, faces impassive, as they deliver messages, collect tributes, and keep an eye on the endless parade of would-be allies and enemies. It's a world where you quickly learn that a word in the right ear can protect you from disaster, or land you in it. The eunuchs, formerly servants but practically power brokers, are the silent pulse of palace life. One smile from the chief eunuch can open doors that have been locked for months. A frown can mean your favorite cousin will be sleeping near the kitchens for a year. Mainstream historical fact: for centuries, Chinese emperors relied on eunuchs as trusted agents, both in domestic affairs and, at times, even in matters of state. They had access to the innermost chambers and sometimes became the de facto rulers, especially when the emperor was young or distracted. Your first real encounter comes when you're summoned by a particularly stern eunuch to deliver a message to the Empress Dowager. His expression never shifts, even when a nervous attendant spills a whole tray of tea at his feet. "No need to clean it," he says quietly, "unless you want to make more noise." You swallow your nerves and promise yourself not to drop anything today. As you walk with him through the labyrinthine corridors, you realize he knows every shortcut, every alcove where a quick conversation might change the course of a day or a dynasty. You soon discover that eunuchs cultivate their own networks, whispering with kitchen staff, trading jokes with the guards, and yes, sometimes collecting small gifts in exchange for a good word here and there. You catch one slipping a string of prayer beads to a junior maid who then finds herself assigned to the coveted night watch, a quieter, more peaceful post. Historians still argue whether eunuchs' infamous reputation for bribery and manipulation is fair, or simply the result of desperate courtiers needing a scapegoat when things go wrong. There's a running joke among the palace women. If you want your secret safe, tell a eunuch, then wait to hear it back at dinner. Still, some eunuchs are fiercely loyal, binding their fates to particular empresses, concubines, or even child princes. One legendary eunuch is said to have saved a future emperor's life by smuggling him through the kitchens disguised as a dumpling seller. Fringe tidbit: there's a tale of an entire uprising foiled by a eunuch who intercepted a plot written in invisible ink. He noticed the letter smelled oddly of vinegar, a dead giveaway for palace-trained noses. The younger women tend to underestimate the eunuchs at first, seeing only servants with strange status, but soon you learn that a passing comment about the weather, shared with the right eunuch at the right moment, can get you extra sweets at supper, or a warning about which courtyards to avoid that evening. The most powerful eunuchs never threaten, never raise their voices. Their strength is in what they choose not to say. Historians still debate whether the palace's reliance on eunuchs created more stability or chaos. Did their networks of information help the empresses and dowagers survive court politics, or did it simply encourage an endless cycle of secrets and betrayals? You suspect the truth is both. Every alliance comes with a price, and every favor must someday be repaid. You begin to cultivate your own quiet relationships, leaving small offerings of fruit or incense in gratitude for good advice. You watch, learn, and listen, careful never to gossip too freely, and always ready with a polite nod for the eunuch who seems to be everywhere at once. Some nights you wonder what dreams and fears these silent watchers keep hidden behind their careful faces. Maybe, like you, they are simply trying to survive the endless game of loyalty, power, and luck that is palace life. Before sleep you recall a wry piece of advice whispered in the laundry courtyard. Trust the eunuchs, but count your hairpins before you go to bed. In a world where even your dreams might have ears, you tuck yourself under your embroidered quilt and let the hush of secrets lull you to sleep. One more survivor in a city built on whispers. There's a peculiar thrill the first time you're handed the Empress's wardrobe list, an inventory longer than your entire streets back home, and much more mysterious. You enter the dressing chambers with a mixture of awe and anxiety, surrounded by walls lined in cedar and thick with the scent of camphor and jasmine. Hair, silk and gold are not just symbols of rank, but the very fabric of politics. Every layer, every jewel, every pin in a headdress is a statement, a silent signal that everyone in the palace knows how to read, even if they'll never admit it. You help unpack today's selection. A dragon-embroidered robe, so heavy it takes 2 attendants to lift. A phoenix crown with tassels that chime softly with every movement, and slippers stitched with golden clouds. The Empress's wardrobe is as dazzling as it is intimidating. Mainstream historical fact: the attire of Chinese empresses was governed by strict rules. Certain colors and motifs were reserved for the highest ranks, and even the length of the sash or the number of pearls on a crown could spell the difference between honor and humiliation. Sometimes a single misplaced accessory was seen as a challenge to the established order. The dressing process is almost ceremonial. You watch as the chief attendant checks every thread for perfection and slips on layer after layer of silk, each one a shield against palace gossip, a weapon in the subtle war of appearances. You catch yourself grinning at the absurdity of it all. In a world where a single hairpin can cause a week's worth of rumours, who needs swords? The Empress herself, you notice, seems half amused, half resigned as she endures the process, joking gently about how, if the dragons stitched on her sleeve ever started fighting, the court would be in real trouble. You learn to decode the wardrobe's silent messages. Gold and red for major ceremonies, jade green for the Empress Dowager's birthday, peony patterns for good fortune, unless of course you're in mourning, in which case even your underrobe must be white. There's a legendary story whispered with delight among the younger maids about the time an empress wore a butterfly hairpin at a feast, causing such a commotion that the emperor had to call for an extra round of music just to cool tempers. Fringe tidbit: it's said that clever empresses sometimes used wardrobe accidents to send secret signals to allies or adversaries. A sash left untied, a brooch placed upside down, but it's not all show. The heavy garments and dazzling jewels are also a form of armour. When you pass through the palace, everyone you meet bows a little lower, eyes a little wider. The imperial jewels, the famous 9-dragon necklace, the phoenix tail earrings, the gold-tipped jade comb, are more than precious. They are the keys to survival.
Historians still argue whether the endless emphasis on appearance helped women wield more power, or simply trapped them in a gilded cage of beauty and expectation. You notice that the days you dress the empress in blue silk with pearl clasps are the days the ministers seem less argumentative, and that on feast days even the youngest attendant sneak peeks at her golden slippers for good luck.
The wardrobe itself is a living thing, always evolving, always ready for the next ceremony or crisis. On quieter days, the empress sometimes invites her closest attendants to choose a favourite jewel for luck, she jokes, or perhaps to reward loyalty with a little borrowed splendour. At night, the dressing room becomes a gossip parlour, the air filled with stories about who wore what, who got to pin the hair, and who once dropped a priceless jade bead down a drain and lived to tell about it. You share in the laughter, relieved for a few moments from the constant pressure of palace life. It's a reminder that underneath the gold and silk, everyone is human, even the empress. You return to your own humble quarters, your fingers still tingling from handling treasures that would feed your family for generations. You wonder what tomorrow's wardrobe will bring. A crisis in crimson, a triumph in gold, or simply another day's careful balancing act between power, beauty, and survival. It starts with a waft of 5 spice and the distant echo of laughter. Tonight is a palace banquet, and you're expected to help ensure every detail is perfect. You slip through the kitchens where steam billows from bamboo baskets, the air alive with gossip and anticipation. Outside, the palace is transforming, lanterns blaze in the courtyards, silks are hung from carved beams, and musicians tune their instruments in the hope that this feast will be remembered, but not for any embarrassing mishap. In the Forbidden City, banquets aren't just about eating. They are power meals, choreographed with the precision of a military campaign. You help arrange the seating, always a minefield, as rank, favour, and recent rumours determine exactly who sits where, and next to whom. There's a secret logic to the seating chart. The closer to the emperor, the higher the honour, or the hotter the seat, if the conversation turns treacherous. You check the placement twice, then a third time, recalling the story of a minor concubine, who was once demoted simply for sitting a row too close to the imperial mother-in-law. Mainstream historical fact: imperial Chinese banquets were legendary for their complexity, sometimes running to over 100 courses, with a dizzying array of symbolic dishes, duck for fidelity, lotus root for unity, and occasionally something mysterious enough that you're sure the cooks made it up on the spot. You pass through the kitchens again, sidestepping a near disaster as a platter of glazed carp almost slides off its tray. The chefs are famous for their creativity and nerves of steel, but everyone knows the real tension isn't whether the food is delicious. It always is. But whether the dishes themselves send the right message. A soup served too cold, a garnish in the wrong shape, a misplaced chopstick, any could be interpreted as a veiled insult. Fringe tidbit. In some dynasties, a certain type of sweet cake was believed to guarantee favour if served during the New Year's banquet. Unsurprisingly, it vanished quickly, leaving behind a trail of disappointed hopefuls and a kitchen full of sticky fingers. As the feast begins, you marvel at the sheer spectacle. Dishes arrive in waves: bird's nest soup, turtle jelly, steamed buns shaped like golden peaches, and platters of fruit arranged to resemble dragons and phoenixes. Toasts follow, each loaded with so much symbolism. You're not sure whether you're drinking to the emperor's health or subtly suggesting the minister next to you needs a haircut. The emperor offers a toast with a smile, but you notice his gaze flicks pointedly to the grand tutor. Was that an inside joke or a coded threat? The empress's table is the centre of its own drama. You spot a junior consort quietly shifting her plate away from the spicy mustard, rumoured to be the favourite of her chief rival, while an attendant discreetly tastes each dish before serving. In the corner, the Empress Dowager sips her tea, serene as ever. But you catch her giving a barely perceptible nod as a dish of sea cucumber passes her way. A sign of approval, or perhaps a warning for the kitchen to stay in her good graces. Historians still argue whether the true purpose of these banquets was genuine celebration or a means of social control. Did the emperor use food and feasting to solidify alliances, or simply to keep his rivals off balance and distracted with culinary fireworks?
You suspect it's both. In the palace, nothing is ever just what it seems.
After the main courses, the entertainment begins. Dancers in swirling silks, musicians plucking ancient melodies, and, if you're lucky, a clever juggler who manages to balance 3 lacquered soup bowls on his head, while reciting poetry about moonlit rivers. You join in the laughter, relieved when a difficult moment passes without scandal, and watch as the Empress quietly shares a joke with her closest attendant, a flash of warmth in an evening otherwise governed by protocol. As the night winds down, leftovers are carefully boxed up for the kitchen staff, and a few select guests slip away, with extra pastries tucked up their sleeves. The air is heavy with the scent of ginger and 1,000 unsaid words. You help extinguish the lanterns, already hearing the low murmur of guests dissecting every moment: who toasted whom, who laughed too loudly, who left before dessert. The feast is over, but the real digestion of secrets, alliances and slights has only just begun. You return to your quarters, grateful you didn't spill a single teacup, and wonder what the next banquet will bring. In the palace, every meal is another chapter in the never-ending story of who rises, who falls, and who manages to keep their dignity and their place at the table just one more night. By dawn, the banqueting hall is swept clean, but you're still thinking about the coded glances and strained laughter that filled the air just hours before. Yet, tonight's palace lesson isn't about feasts or finery. It's about the sharp edge beneath the silks. The art of survival in a place where danger is as real as gold and even more common. You've seen the wary glances exchanged over cups of tea and learned that not every gift arrives with friendly intentions. In the Forbidden City, poison, exile, and political escape aren't wild stories. They're practical skills for anyone hoping to last. It begins with a subtle warning. You notice a dish placed just a little too far from the Empress's reach, a cup of tea replaced mid-conversation, a trusted attendant watching for the smallest sign of discomfort. Mainstream historical fact. In some dynasties, Poison was the palace's silent assassin, and the threat of it hung over every meal, every offering, every gift from a supposed ally. Taster officials were as vital as jewelers and astrologers. More than one empress is said to have survived only by eating sparingly, or insisting her favorite foods be brought by her own kin. You're taught to observe, sniff the tea, glance at the color of the rice, politely decline a sweet if it comes from an unfamiliar hand. The older palace women whisper about a legendary poison tester who could spot a deadly mushroom by the faintest sheen on its cap. Fringe tidbits and favoured consorts developed their own palate for trouble, learning to taste even the faintest bitterness in a dish. A skill so prized that one empress reportedly demanded daily lessons from the kitchen apothecary. Yet poison isn't the only threat. You quickly learn that the palace has 1,000 ways to exile those who fall from favour. Sometimes it's literal, a cart at midnight, a journey to a remote convent, an invitation to meditate at a far-off temple. More often, it's social, a subtle shift in who's invited to banquets, who gets left off a guest list, who finds themselves assigned to the bleakest, coldest wing of the palace. Historians still argue whether these punishments kept the court in order or simply created new generations of bitter enemies, biding their time for a comeback. You recall the tale of a once powerful empress who, after a single misstep, found herself moved from the sunny east wing to a shadowy storeroom. It was said she survived her exile by befriending the palace cats and weaving tapestries so beautiful the emperor eventually called her back, though some whisper it was really the cats who persuaded him. You laugh softly at this, but tuck the lesson away. In the palace, even exile can be a performance, and every setback is a test of your patience and ingenuity. Escaping disaster sometimes means escaping altogether. There are stories, half legend, half truth, of clever women who faked illness, feigned madness, or arranged their own banishments just to stay alive.
One famous courtier, when cornered by accusations, managed to vanish for months, reappearing only when the political climate shifted and her rivals had been toppled. Fringe tidbit: a hidden tunnel beneath the Empress's apartments is rumoured to have been dug by a dowager long ago, though only the oldest eunuchs claim to know its true entrance.
Historians still debate whether the constant threat of poison and exile made the palace more disciplined or simply more paranoid. You notice that the best survivors are never the loudest or the prettiest. They're the most observant, the ones who remember who offered what, who said which blessing, and who always shows up with just a little too much enthusiasm. Tonight, as you tuck yourself into bed, you practice the tiny rituals you've picked up. Smell your tea, count the blossoms on your hairpin, lay your slippers toe to toe in case you need to slip out quietly in the night. You feel a strange comfort in the knowledge that survival here is both art and habit, equal parts caution and luck. The wind outside whistles through the courtyard, and you imagine the palace in the dark, silent, watchful, filled with women plotting not just to win, but to endure.
In this world, even a smile can be a shield, and sometimes the best escape is to vanish without a trace, leaving nothing behind but a trail of rumours and a carefully folded silk robe.
Morning finds you walking the garden paths in a rare moment of calm, only to overhear the gentle strumming of a lute from behind a carved screen. In a world defined by duty, hierarchy, and calculated risk, love and loneliness become their own forms of quiet rebellion. The palace is a place of impossible longing, hundreds of women dreaming, hoping, scheming, and sometimes finding fleeting comfort in a secret glance or stolen note. Romance here is always shadowed by caution, and heartbreak, as you soon learn, can be as dangerous as any rival. You linger near a shaded pavilion, watching as a young consort smiles a little too brightly at a court musician. Their conversation is hushed, words hidden behind poetry and clever turns of phrase. Mainstream historical fact: forbidden love stories are woven through palace chronicles. Musicians, scholars, even eunuchs, each could become the focus of a lonely heart's affections. Sometimes the emperor himself is the source of hope or heartbreak, his favour as changeable as the spring weather, and while the palace rewards loyalty and obedience, it punishes forbidden attachments with startling severity. It's said that a note folded into the shape of a crane can pass from hand to hand without attracting notice. You witness the furtive exchange of just such a note, slipped between the folds of a sleeve while attendants pretend not to see. The empress, too, is not immune. One old tale tells of an empress who fell in love with a court painter, their secret meetings hidden beneath the guise of art lessons.
When the affair was discovered, both vanished, some say to distant posts, others believe to a quietly shared retirement. Historians still argue whether love affairs in the palace were common acts of courage or desperate gambles with the highest possible stakes.
The loneliness for most is the more faithful companion. Nights stretch long in the forbidden city, and the only visitors to your chamber may be the occasional messenger or the echo of a memory. You befriend a few fellow attendants, sharing jokes and whispered stories about life before the palace. Some nights you catch someone weeping softly, mourning family left behind or a life unlived. It's a reminder that for every story of triumph, there are 100 quiet heartbreaks, losses unmarked by history, but just as real. A fringe tidbit. The legend has it that the best moon-gazing spot in the palace, on the roof of the Jade Pavilion, is haunted by the spirit of a lovesick concubine, who wrote poems so beautiful the emperor himself was said to sigh.
On Mid-Autumn Festival, hopeful women leave small cakes and lanterns there, seeking luck in love or at least a night free from sorrow. You notice, too, that some bonds are more practical than passionate.
A friendship with a clever maid, an alliance with a favoured eunuch, or a long-standing joke shared with an older consort can become lifelines. These small comforts, while rarely the stuff of epic poetry, are vital, an antidote to the endless watchfulness and performance of court life. You treasure every quiet laugh and every shared secret, knowing that tomorrow's rival might be today's shoulder to cry on. Historians still debate whether the palace's many rules and restrictions protected its women from scandal, or merely drove their heartbreaks deeper underground. Some say that the loneliness was a deliberate strategy. Keep the women too busy, too anxious, and too wary to plot or conspire. Others believe it was an inevitable result of a system designed to isolate and control. As the sun sets, you pause beneath a flowering tree, a petal drifting down to land on your sleeve. For a moment, you allow yourself to daydream. A walk through an open city gate, a letter sent home, a night spent laughing with friends, instead of worrying about rank and favour. In this brief golden hour, love, however impossible, feels close enough to touch. You return to your chambers with a mix of longing and hope, holding tight to the belief that even in the most gilded cage, the heart finds a way to flatter, if only for a moment. Here in the palace, love is a risk, loneliness a given, but the dream endures embroidered quietly between the lines of every poem, every song, and every sleepless night. You wake to the sound of temple bells echoing faintly through the heavy morning mist, signalling that today the Empress herself will preside from behind the curtain. There's a hush of anticipation in the air as attendants flit about, straightening robes, smoothing scrolls, and rehearsing the proper form of address. You can feel the electricity of court business, rumours already swirling before the audience has even begun. In the imperial court, reigning from behind a silk curtain, is more than a metaphor. The regent empress, or empress dowager, literally sits in a screened alcove, invisible but omnipresent, her silhouette backlit by lanterns as ministers and officials kneel in the grand hall beyond. She listens to petitions, issues commands, and rules with a voice as soft as it is final. Mainstream historical fact. This reigning from behind the curtain Trulian was a signature institution of Chinese dynastic politics. Empresses, especially dowagers, were known to serve as regents for child emperors, sometimes for years, holding the real reins of power while technically remaining out of sight. You slip into the back of the hall and watch the performance unfold. The emperor, often a child or a distracted adult, sits on the dragon throne, stiff with ceremonial layers and heavy crown. Ministers glance nervously at the curtain, knowing that while they address the emperor, the real decisions are being made just beyond their sight. You realize that every cough, every flutter of a fan is being noted and weighed. The Empress Dowager's voice is clear, but never rushed. She dispenses praise with a single word and issues warnings with a carefully timed pause.
Some days her decisions are swift and merciful. Other days she lets ministers squirm, making them debate policies, until someone finally stumbles on the answer she already decided hours ago.
Fringe tidbits. One legendary Empress Dowager was known to drop a single jade bead onto a tray whenever she was displeased. The sound became so infamous that ministers claimed to dream about it, waking in a cold sweat with jade bead nightmares.
As the day wears on, you notice the subtle choreography of alliances forming and dissolving at her slightest hint. A minister bows a fraction lower, a junior official offers a poetic blessing, and somewhere in the crowd, a once favoured attendant is quietly overlooked, her mistake noted, her fate sealed. Historians still argue whether these regencies served the empire or were merely power plays to keep the throne within one family's grasp. Behind the curtain, the Empress Dowager is rarely alone. Trusted eunuchs whisper news and names, favoured consorts act as informal secretaries, and younger relatives learn by watching her every move. You realize that ruling by suggestion, by rumour, and by ritual is as much about theatre as politics. The curtain itself is a symbol, a line between public duty and private power, between what's seen and what's really happening. One day, you catch a rare glimpse of her preparing for an audience, composing herself with incense and prayer. Her expression is weary, her voice gentle, as she rehearses the words that will become law. You wonder what it costs to carry the weight of an empire while rarely being seen, to wield immense authority, yet always from behind a veil. Does she ever long to step out into the open, or is the power behind the curtain the only kind truly safe to hold? Historians debate whether these women ruled for the good of the empire, or simply to preserve their own positions. Some empresses were revered as wise guardians, others whispered about as master manipulators. You watch as her decisions ripple outward, shaping not just the fate of ministers, but of soldiers, farmers, and families you'll never meet.
As dusk falls, and the last petition is read, you slip out of the hall, awed by the sheer delicacy and danger of ruling by proxy. You resolve to remember every gesture, every lesson in subtlety, knowing that in this world, true power is often hidden, but always present, just behind the curtain, just out of reach, and yet somehow in command of everything.
You wake before sunrise to a storm of whispers. A new tale is circulating, and this time it's not about the empress behind the curtain or the latest kitchen intrigue. This morning, everyone is talking about the most infamous woman in imperial Chinese history, Wu Zetian. Her name sends a frisson of excitement and dread through the palace. You listen as attendants retell her story in hushed, half-reverent tones, as if she might appear at any moment, resplendent in red, to correct the record herself. You close your eyes and picture Wu Zetian as she once was. A clever, ambitious girl, of humble birth, selected for the court of Emperor Taizong.
At first, she's just another concubine, another pretty face among dozens. But Wu's rise is the stuff of legend, and as some would have it, scandal, mainstream historical fact. Wu Zetian became the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own right, not just as empress or regent, but as the son of heaven, founder of her own dynasty. Her ascent, as you soon discover, is as fascinating as it is controversial.
In those early days, Wu's power lies not in beauty, but in intelligence and patience. She outmaneuvers rivals with subtle alliances and, it's rumoured, more ruthless strategies when needed. Some say she leveraged the affections of Taizong's son, the future Emperor Gozong, to return to court after being exiled to a convent, a comeback that would make any palace strategist jealous. Fringe tidbit. Legend claims that Wu once hid a note in a Buddhist sutra, begging for a chance to return, and that her prayers were answered by a fateful imperial visit. You walk in her imagined footsteps, feeling the pressure of life in a court that expects women to serve and obey, never to rule. Yet Wu challenges every expectation. She is shrewd, playing ministers against each other, winning the loyalty of clever eunuchs, and securing her son's positions until she ultimately claims the throne for herself. The court is stunned, the country divided. Historians still argue whether her reign was a golden age of reform, or a dark period marked by ruthless purges and paranoia. You overhear stories of how she promoted merit over birth, bringing scholars and officials from all backgrounds into her administration. Some praise her for supporting Buddhism and the arts, for championing new forms of poetry, and for expanding the state's examination system. Others shudder as they recount tales of secret police and mysterious disappearances, evidence perhaps that the price of her power was paid in fear and silence. There's a sly respect among palace women for Wu's ability to survive the poison, exile, and betrayals that ended so many others. Her name becomes a kind of talisman, a whispered reminder that in the right circumstances, anyone might ascend from obscurity to the highest seat in the land. But there's a warning too. Even Wu, with all her cunning, faced rebellion and resistance. Her enemies multiplied both within her family and without, and in her later years, she grew more isolated, wary of shadows, even in her own chambers. Fringe details fill the gossip. Some say she kept a pet parrot that could recite court secrets. Others claim her favourite flowers, the peonies, once refused to bloom when she ordered them, sparking a legendary imperial tantrum. Historians still debate whether Wu was a usurper who destroyed tradition, or a visionary who changed the empire for the better. You suspect the truth, as always, is tangled somewhere in between. You return to your daily duties with a new sense of possibility. If Wu Zetian could shatter every rule and outlast every enemy, maybe there's hope for anyone clever and brave enough to navigate palace life. Her legacy, complicated and enduring, lingers in every cautious glance, every ambitious plan, and every quiet prayer for just a little more time in the Emperor's favour. As dusk falls, you imagine Wu's ghost, resplendent and wry, still haunting the gardens, offering sly advice to the living. Keep your friends close, your enemies guessing, and always, always look good in red. There's a new chill in the air, and you sense it before you ever step into the echoing marble halls. Something has gone wrong. You hear it in the silence of the morning courtyards, the nervous glances of attendants, and the way even the most confident officials seem to move a little more cautiously. You soon realize you are witnessing what every palace woman dreads, the sudden terrifying fall from power. Today, the palace is holding its breath for someone, an empress, a favoured consort, a once untouchable dowager, whose fortunes have changed with breathtaking speed. You pass by the hall of the Golden Phoenix and see her yesterday. She glided like royalty, robes bright as summer sunlight, her retinue trailing like a river behind her. Now her jewels are gone, her hair unadorned, and the crowds part around her like wind through grass. There's a lesson here. In the palace, rank is a delicate illusion, maintained by rituals and respect, but easily shattered by one rumour, one misstep, or the whim of an emperor. Mainstream historical fact, deposition, exile, or forced suicide was the fate of many a powerful empress or consort throughout Chinese history. No matter how high a woman rose, her position was never truly secure. You listen as servants quietly recount the moment of downfall. A curt order from the emperor, a sealed decree from the empress dowager, the sudden closing of a favorite garden, or the removal of a trusted attendant. Sometimes it's a whispered accusation, sometimes the slow tightening of privileges. No more invitations to banquets, no more gifts from visiting ministers, the cold comfort of isolation in once glittering quarters. The court seems to shrink away, pretending not to notice. You wonder if it's fear, habit, or the simple knowledge that anyone could be next. Historians still argue whether these swift reversals were necessary to maintain imperial order, or simply the result of palace politics and personal vendettas. You recall the tale of a powerful concubine, once in line to become empress, who lost everything after an ill-timed joke at a festival. A moment's laughter turned into a lifetime's regret. Another story tells of an empress deposed for failing to produce a male heir, sent to a distant nunnery, with only a handful of loyal servants and memories for company. Some women face their fall with dignity, accepting exile or demotion as stoically as they once wore the dragon crown. Others refuse to fade quietly, making impassioned appeals or orchestrating last-ditch alliances in hopes of a return. Fringe tidbit: it's rumoured that a few clever exiles kept up secret correspondence with sympathetic eunuchs, passing along coded messages tucked into baskets of fruit or sewn into the lining of robes. Do you watch as the fallen empress walks the gardens alone, her posture still regal, even as her future hangs in the balance? Sometimes palace women leave subtle tokens behind, a hairpin under a stone, a favourite poem etched into the wood of a hidden door, as if to say, I was here, I mattered, and I remember. You think about the strange comfort of these gestures, a reminder that even in disgrace, memory and meaning endure. For some, deposition is the end. For others, it's the beginning of a quieter, stranger story. A life spent in a distant corner of the empire, remembered only in cautionary tales and whispered gossip. Historians still debate whether the threat of sudden downfall made women more cautious or simply more resilient. You sense that in the palace, the line between survival and catastrophe is as thin as a silk thread. As night falls, you wonder who will rise to fill the empty space, what new alliances will blossom, and how long any victory can truly last. The moon hangs heavy over the palace rooftops, and you tuck yourself into bed with a new resolve: to watch, to wait, and to remember that in the world of empresses, nothing is permanent, except perhaps the power of a good story told long after the silks have faded and the court has moved on.
There's a distinct buzz in the palace today, the kind of anticipatory energy that makes even the guards stand a little straighter and the youngest maids giggle behind their hands.
The reason soon becomes clear. Imperial wedding preparations are underway. The scent of fresh peonies and sandalwood fills the corridors, and every available attendant is pressed into service, from polishing gold plates to rehearsing elaborate bows. Weddings here aren't just family affairs. They are high-stakes political theatre, a spectacle engineered to display the might, wealth, and unity of the entire empire. You're tasked with helping arrange the wedding procession, and as you tie brocade ribbons to lacquered sedan chairs, you catch glimpses of the bride, face hidden behind layers of red silk, hands trembling as her future hangs in the balance. Mainstream historical fact: imperial weddings in China were astonishingly elaborate, lasting days or even weeks, and involved everything from the reading of ancient prophecies to multi-stage rituals of purification, feasting, and gift-giving. The emperor's marriage was never just about two people. It was a negotiation of alliances, the sealing of peace treaties, the exchange of dowries measured in mountains of silver and jade. The palace comes alive with music and movement. Dancers swirl like ribbons in the wind, musicians tune their pipers, and the court chefs prepare delicacies whose recipes are guarded more fiercely than military secrets. Ministers jostle for the best view in the ceremonial hall, while foreign envoys marvel at the spectacle, clutching their gifts and practicing phrases in halting Mandarin. You can't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the newlyweds, trapped in a whirl of ritual and expectation, their every gesture scrutinized for hidden meanings. As the ceremony unfolds, you marvel at the details, the hair-combing ritual that symbolizes out the lighting of paired candles to drive away bad spirits, the procession of the bride's attendants, carrying auspicious treasures, jade bracelets, golden carp, boxes of silk thread, all meant to ensure happiness and fertility. You hear the guests murmur as the couple takes the three bows to heaven and earth, to the parents and finally to each other. Historians still argue whether these rituals fostered true harmony or simply masked the hard bargaining happening behind closed doors. The imperial matchmakers are a force of their own. You spot one famous for her skill at brokering alliances between rival families, offering whispered advice and possibly thinly veiled threats. Fringe tidbit. It's rumoured that a particularly influential matchmaker once delayed an entire wedding by feigning a bad omen, only relenting after being promised a rare white jade bangle. If you squint, you can almost see her smirk as she slips a new bracelet onto her wrist. During the wedding feast, the empress presides in regal splendour, while the emperor, sometimes barely more than a boy, does his best to look commanding, though his hands shake just a little as he raises his cup. The laughter's polite but subdued. Everyone knows that the wrong joke could mean exile before dessert. Yet beneath the formality, you sense tiny rebellions, a sideways glance, a suppressed giggle, a young attendant slipping the bride a lucky coin for courage. As the celebrations stretch into the night, lanterns glow like captive stars, and the gardens are filled with the sounds of music, poetry, and a few tipsy guests singing old folk songs under their breath. You help clean up after the final round of toasts, collecting empty teacups and confetti, and hear the inevitable comparison, not as grand as the last one, but the peonies were exquisite. Historians still debate whether these imperial weddings strengthened the throne or simply provided a temporary truce in the endless palace intrigues. You suspect they did both, and that for at least one night, beauty and hope eclipsed politics and fear. You fall asleep exhausted, the music still echoing in your mind, and wonder whether the new empress will find happiness, or if her wedding was simply the beginning of another, even more complex story, one written in secrets and silks, in alliances and dreams. You wake the next morning to a nervous flurry in the air. The Empress's chambers are abuzz with talk of omens, superstitions, and forbidden rituals. Even the most skeptical officials are casting wary glances at the sky, and every accidental sneeze draws a ripple of worried laughter from the younger attendants. In the palace, luck is not just a matter of belief. It's woven into every detail of daily life, from the colour of a hairpin to the direction you turn when stepping out of bed. You join the Empress's morning procession, trailing a retinue of ladies in waiting, each clutching a different lucky charm. A carved jade cicada dangles from one belt, a tiny bag of blessed rice from another. Mainstream historical fact: the imperial court was obsessed with omens and auspicious signs, and entire offices were devoted to reading the stars, interpreting dreams, and advising on which days were best for ceremonies or travel. And even the emperor rarely dared act without consulting his astrologers. The palace is a minefield of taboos. Don't sweep the floor after dark, or you'll sweep away good fortune. Don't step on the threshold, or you might insult the household spirits. You overhear a senior attendant scold a junior for humming an unlucky melody on the eve of a major festival, a song said to invite sadness for a whole year. You stifle a giggle, recalling how your grandmother would cover mirrors on stormy nights to keep away angry ghosts. Some superstitions are almost comical. You watch as the kitchen staff tosses salt over their shoulders before preparing the Empress's birthday cake, and the head gardener refuses to plant peonies on the east side of the pavilion because the wind there is stubborn. You spot the Empress herself slipping a silver ring onto her left hand before a crucial audience. A fringe tidbits, silver was believed to neutralize poison and attract good dreams. But not all omens are light-hearted. You feel the tension mount as an unlucky omen appears. A palace cat howling at noon, a streak of red in the sunrise, or a precious porcelain vase shattering with no one near. These are taken seriously. Court astrologers scramble to recalculate their charts, priests are summoned to offer prayers, and the Empress may even postpone important events for days on end. Historians still argue whether these rituals were meant to protect the dynasty, or simply to maintain control over an anxious court. Rumours about forbidden rituals, those the court publicly disdains but privately pursues, sweep the palace. There's talk of an old dowager who once hired a wandering Taoist to bless her rooms using a string of copper coins and whispered charms. Some claim secret midnight ceremonies take place in hidden gardens, where wishes are written on slips of silk and burned in censers to float up to the gods. Fringe tidbit: it's whispered that a clever concubine once staged an entire haunting to frighten a rival into requesting a transfer to another palace wing. You become adept at reading the currents of superstition. If a servant starts carrying a mirror everywhere, it means gossip is flying and someone's reputation is under threat. If everyone's suddenly burning sandalwood incense, a bout of sickness or political unrest may be brewing, and if the palace cats vanish for a day, you'd be wise to lay low until things calm down. Historians still debate whether these beliefs brought order or chaos, comfort or anxiety. You suspect they did all at once, making the palace both more mysterious and more manageable, a world where even the smallest sign could mean everything or nothing, and where ritual gave people a sense of control over the unpredictable winds of fate. As the day ends, you tie a red thread around your wrist, just for luck, and wonder whether the next omen will bring fortune or trouble. For now, you count your blessings, avoid whistling after dark, and resolve to never ever sneeze during a royal banquet, not unless you want to become the next legend whispered in the lantern-lit corridors of the Forbidden City. You rise before dawn to the faint sound of chanting. The palace is filled with incense smoke and the low, rhythmic murmur of prayers. Today the Empress is leading a ceremony in one of the oldest temple pavilions, and even the most cynical courtiers are making quiet offerings for luck, health, or a little extra favour. In a world that feels as uncertain as a house of cards, religion weaves through every layer of palace life, shaping rituals, policies, and even the way you dream. You move through the halls, dodging priests in flowing robes and Taoist mystics consulting battered almanacs. Each religion claims a corner of the Forbidden City, but none can claim it entirely. Mainstream historical fact: Imperial China's court was a mosaic of faiths, with Buddhism, Taoism, ancestor worship, and even bits of folk superstition, each holding sway over different rulers and empresses. The Empress herself often sets the tone, her piety or strategic lack thereof, influencing everything from official holidays to how food is prepared in the kitchens. The Empress's own faith is a study in balance. You watch as she burns incense to the ancestors, bows to a bronze Buddha, and consults a Taoist priest for advice on the year's best planting days, all before breakfast. Historians still argue whether such displays were genuine devotion or savvy performances, carefully calibrated to keep every priest and minister happy. You suspect it's a bit of both, a spiritual multitasking, born of necessity and the ever-present desire to avoid offending anyone important. Religious festivals are a palace highlight. The Lantern Festival, Ghost Festival, and Mid-Autumn Festival each bring days of celebration, with elaborate rituals and offerings, cakes shaped like moons, towers of fruit, flocks of paper cranes and fish. You join other attendants in stringing lanterns above the lotus pond, and giggle as someone dares to slip a tiny joke note into a bowl of rice meant for the kitchen gods. Yet, Beneath the laughter there's a sense of real awe. You've seen the palace's oldest women kneel for hours, their hands working prayer beads smooth as river stones. Fringe tidbit. It's rumoured that, late at night, certain forbidden corners of the palace are reserved for secret monks, priests who once crossed the Empress Dowager or fell afoul of a jealous official, now living out their days, offering clandestine blessings or wisdom to those brave enough to seek them. The palace's shrines are also stages for subtle competition. You notice how gifts to the gods, a carved dragon, a rare flower, a delicately folded origami, are as much about public image as private piety. There's quiet jockeying over who gets to light the first incense stick at the New Year's altar, and whose prayers are echoed in the Empress's own offering. Sometimes an unlucky or awkward offering sparks palace gossip for weeks. Do you hear the story of an ambitious concubine who brought imported incense, only to discover it was considered unlucky that year? Her fortunes, you note, never quite recovered. Historians still debate whether religious ceremonies genuinely unified the court or merely offered another arena for intrigue. Were empresses spiritual leaders or just masters of ritual performance? Did faith protect them or expose them to new dangers, like the threat of being accused of witchcraft or sacrilege? In quieter moments you watch as the empress visits the temple at night, lighting a candle and bowing her head, not as a ruler, but as a daughter, a wife, a mother. You sense her prayers are as tangled as your own, a wish for peace, safety, and a little mercy in a world that rarely offers any guarantees. As dusk falls, the incense burns low, and you return to your chamber, a faint trace of sandalwood still clinging to your sleeves. You whisper a prayer of your own, not for power or rank, but for another day of peace, another night of dreamless sleep, and perhaps a gentle fortune in the next turning of the palace wheel. You wake to the distant sound of horses and unfamiliar voices echoing in the courtyard. The palace is entertaining foreign visitors, and everything is thrown into carefully orchestrated chaos.
Empresses and high-ranking ladies are abuzz with preparations. Gifts are selected, costumes chosen, protocols rehearsed until even the youngest attendants can recite the required greetings in at least 3 languages. The air is thick with nerves and curiosity. The arrival of foreign diplomats, traders, or even so-called barbarians is both a threat and an opportunity in the delicately balanced world of the Forbidden City.
You're summoned to help set the banquet hall for the big event, laying out porcelain and gold, arranging flowers, and nervously practicing the formal bows you'll need if you cross paths with anyone more exotic than a silk merchant from the next province.
Mainstream historical fact. Throughout Chinese history, the imperial court welcomed envoys and emissaries from across Asia and beyond. Mongol Khans, Korean princes, Indian monks, Persian traders, Jesuit priests from distant Europe. Each meeting was a careful dance, the empresses playing a key role in projecting the empire's wealth, dignity, and sometimes just a hint of mystery. Today the empress is expected to host a banquet for a visiting delegation. The guest list is a who's who of palace power, senior officials, trusted eunuchs, and of course, the most prestigious consorts and princesses. You marvel at the spectacle, an endless parade of food, music, and diplomatic double talk. The kitchens are in overdrive, fragrant lamb from the western provinces, exotic fruits, wines from faraway lands, and sweets moulded into dragons and lotuses. Fringe tidbit, it's said that one particularly cheeky Mongol Khan tried to gift the empress a live leopard, prompting palace guards to spend a whole afternoon chasing it around the gardens while everyone pretended nothing was amiss. The language barrier adds a layer of comedy and risk. A toast in the wrong dialect could mean disaster. A misplaced gesture might spark an international incident. The empress, ever composed, moves through the room with practiced ease, offering polite phrases and enigmatic smiles. She presents the official gifts, silk, jade, intricately painted fans, each one chosen for symbolic significance.
Historians still argue whether these exchanges genuinely built bridges or simply disguised the endless jockeying for status and information. As the banquet unfolds, you notice the palace's special brand of hospitality. Guests are seated just close enough to feel honored, but not so close they might overhear confidential discussions. The empress listens intently, asking about the guests' home customs, and sometimes dropping a subtle hint about the empire's power, just in case anyone is thinking of testing its patience. You watch as the Jesuit priest tries to explain his strange book of moving stars, an early telescope, while a Korean envoy gifts a lacquered screen, so beautiful the empress has it displayed on the spot. There's friendly laughter, but also an undercurrent of calculation. Every compliment, every offering, every awkward pause is noted by the army of attendants and reported back to the inner chambers.
Of course, not every encounter is smooth. A visiting dignitary might present an awkwardly worded letter or misunderstand the rules of the toast.
There's a story among the palace staff about a Turkish trader who gifted the empress a musical instrument no one could play, until a palace musician figured out it made a perfect cat toy, a fact carefully omitted from the official account. Historians still debate whether these diplomatic gatherings truly changed the empire's fate, or simply padded the archives with funny stories.
Did empresses and consorts use their skills to maintain peace, or just add another layer of intrigue to an already complex court?
The reality is as tangled as the knots on a silk fan.
As the night winds down, you help collect the gifts, sweeping up a stray Mongol arrow and a half-eaten French pastry. You wonder what secrets were exchanged behind those polite smiles, and what stories will be retold in the kitchens tomorrow. For now, you tuck yourself in, mind spinning with the flavors, scents, and languages of the day. A reminder that the palace, for all its walls and rituals, is never truly closed to the wider world. By mid-morning, you find a rare hour to slip away from the clamoring halls and into the palace gardens, a haven of green amid the marble and gold. Here, among winding pebble paths and quiet pavilions, the rules relax just a little. The gardens are both a luxury and an escape, the only place where an empress or consort might drop her guard, pen a secret poem, or, on braver days, plot a new alliance beneath the flowering plum trees. You pass the gate with a practiced nod, feeling the sun on your face for the first time in what feels like weeks. The gardens are a world apart. Willows trailing over koi ponds, crickets humming, tiny bridges arching over moon-shaped stones. Mainstream historical fact, Chinese palace gardens were masterpieces of design, intended to evoke mountains, rivers, and forests in miniature, and filled with symbolism from rocks shaped like dragons to lotus ponds, representing purity and renewal. In one secluded pavilion, you see a small group of court ladies reciting poetry, their voices low and measured, the lines veiled in double meanings. Poetry is more than entertainment here. It's a weapon and a balm, a way to signal loyalty, mock a rival, or declare love in code. You join them with a shy verse of your own, and feel the warmth of their laughter as your rhyme about the palace cat's stolen fish wins the morning's impromptu contest. There are rumours of empresses who retreated to these gardens not just to rest, but to hatch plots, mend broken friendships, or if they were very bold, pass a note to an ally or lover. Fringe tidbit, it's whispered that one empress built a listening grotto so she could eavesdrop on rivals, disguising herself as a gardener whenever she needed the latest gossip. The peace of the garden is a thin veneer. You watch a young concubine confiding in an older attendant, her tears hidden behind a sleeve, and overhear snatches of advice about avoiding the Empress Dowager's dangerous moods. Even in the tranquility of nature, there are spies and watchers, from the gardener sweeping the paths to the eunuch resting beneath a magnolia. Historians still argue whether these private escapes gave palace women real freedom or simply provided another stage for subtle power struggles. Some empresses are remembered for transforming the gardens into salons of poetry and music, while others used them for more covert dealings, Midnight meetings, coded exchanges of gifts, or quiet conversations that could change a life overnight. You find your own favourite corner, a low stone bench beside a pond filled with fat, lazy carp. The world shrinks to the slow drift of petals on water. The scratch of your brush as you try to capture a fleeting thought in verse. You notice that even here, laughter is softer, more cautious, as if the flowers themselves might overhear and carry gossip back to the inner court.
In quieter times, the garden is the heart of celebration. Lanterns float on the ponds during the Mid-Autumn Festival, and the first snowfall draws everyone out for a rare snowball fight. Careful, of course, not to aim at anyone too important. The Empress is said to love these brief, unguarded moments, and you sense her presence in the careful arrangement of rocks, the scent of her favourite plum blossom, the half-finished calligraphy scrolls left in a sheltered alcove.
As evening falls and the garden empties, you linger, savouring the fleeting sense of freedom. The palace feels far away, and for a moment you remember who you were before all the silks and secrets. Here, at least, the only audience is the koi and the moon. You tuck your poem into your sleeve, vowing to return in the garden's shifting light. You realize that survival sometimes means carving out small spaces of peace, even if they're just borrowed moments beneath a willow with a poem to keep your dreams alive. Twilight falls gently over the palace roofs as laughter and running feet echo faintly from the distant nursery pavilions. You pause at the threshold, feeling the bittersweet blend of hope and heartbreak that lingers wherever children play. The imperial court might be a stage for power and politics, but here in the shaded corridors, the fate of imperial children, the next generation of princes and princesses, is always the secret heartbeat of palace life. You watch as a governess herds a gaggle of silk-clad toddlers down the path, their lessons in manners, calligraphy, and history interrupted only by the occasional shriek of joy or the thud of a dropped toy. Mainstream historical fact: imperial children were raised in strict seclusion, their days dictated by schedules more rigid than most officials could endure. A prince's smallest mistake could ripple through courtly expectations, while a princess's clever phrase might one day shape alliances through marriage. You notice the guards at the nursery doors, their faces stone stern, yet you see a flash of softness when a small child offers a lotus bun in exchange for a story. Within these walls, the children of the Empress, the favoured consorts, and even lesser concubines all learn their place. Some thrive on the attention, relishing the lessons in statecraft and etiquette. Others, often the cleverest, learn to navigate the world with quiet, watchful eyes, acutely aware that every playmate may someday become a rival or pawn. You hear hushed stories from older maids, the lost little prince who wept for his mother, the princess who hid her poetry under her pillow, the boy who became a general because he was the best at snowball fights. Every nursemaid has her favourites, every eunuch their quiet hopes for the next golden child. Yet palace gossip reminds you that every promise comes with peril. Fringe tidbit: it's whispered that some children, too clever for their own good, were sent away for study in distant temples, conveniently absent from the court during times of dangerous succession disputes. The Empress watches her children with a wary, measured love. Torn between pride and the knowledge that their fates are never fully her own, she oversees their studies, their tutors, their food, ever mindful that even a favourite snack might become a source of scandal if the wrong ingredient is served on the wrong day. You see her sometimes after lessons, walking quietly with a daughter or son, sharing a private story or gentle rebuke. In those moments, the mask of Empress slips, and you see only a mother.
Historians still argue whether imperial childhood was a privilege or a burden. Some say the seclusion and discipline produced wise rulers and capable consorts.
Others believe it bred anxiety, isolation, and sometimes tragedy. There are tales of princes who grew up so protected they struggled to speak to anyone outside the court, and princesses whose arranged marriages led them to distant lands, forever homesick for the gardens of their youth. At night, the children gather for stories, ancient legends of dragon kings and moon maidens, tales of cunning empresses and loyal ministers. They listen wide-eyed, clutching silk blankets, dreams already filling with visions of grandeur and danger. You help light the lanterns as dusk deepens, noticing how even in their sleep, these children carry the weight of history, their every breath a thread in the imperial tapestry. Sometimes you wonder if any of them wish for a life outside the walls, a cottage in the countryside, freedom to climb trees, or run wild through fields without a retinue in tow. But here, destiny is as carefully measured as the length of their sleeves, and the only certainty is that each will shape and be shaped by the tides of palace fortune. As you leave the nursery wing, the sounds of giggles and lullabies trail after you. You realize that even the smallest child is both cherished and watched, protected and prepared for a future as unpredictable as the moon's path across the courtyard sky. A new rumour stirs in the morning air, one that darts from kitchen to corridor with the speed of a startled sparrow. Someone's secret has been spilled, and everyone is quietly calculating what it means for their own alliances. In the palace, information is more valuable than jade, and nowhere is that clearer than in the invisible web of palace spies and whisper networks. Here, every word, every gesture, every raised eyebrow has an audience. You see it play out before breakfast. A senior attendant sidles up to a gardener with a handful of candied ginger, then moves on, head bent in apparent humility. Minutes later, a eunuch passes by, barely pausing to tie his shoe at the doorway, but you catch the glint of a hidden message being slipped beneath a pot. Mainstream historical fact: the Forbidden City ran on a steady diet of secrets and surveillance, with entire departments dedicated to recording, reporting, and sometimes fabricating information about everyone from ministers to chambermaids. Every empress or consort worth her salt cultivates her own whisper network. You learn to spot the signs, the sudden silence when a new face enters a room, the inexplicable way kitchen gossip seems to match what's discussed in the highest halls. You notice the most trusted spies aren't always the obvious choices. Sometimes it's the elderly maid with a limp, the boy who delivers scrolls, or the parrot in the Empress Dowager's chambers. Fringe tidbit: one famous parrot was said to have overheard so many conversations that it had to be retired for accidentally repeating imperial secrets during a banquet. You quickly realize the rules of the game. Information must flow, but never too quickly. Favors are granted in whispers, and debts recorded in memory rather than ink. Even your own minor observations become valuable. Who's been skipping morning prayers? Which consort's favoured colour suddenly changed? Which eunuch always brings sweets on unlucky days? The smallest clue can mean the difference between disaster and salvation. Historians still argue whether these shadowy networks protected the court, or simply fed its most destructive tendencies. Did the endless eavesdropping help prevent real conspiracies, or did it just make everyone more paranoid? You suspect both are true. Some scandals are averted, thanks to a timely warning, but you also see harmless jokes twisted into accusations, and old grudges reignited by a misinterpreted glance. You begin to cultivate your own allies, quiet friendships with kitchen maids, the old man who tends the koi, and a clever page who never seems to be where he's supposed to be. These relationships are as much about trust as survival. Sometimes you pass a message, sometimes you keep a secret, sometimes you simply listen and file away details for the day you might need them. There's an art to the spy game, knowing when to speak and when to hold your tongue, when to encourage gossip, and when to shut it down with a well-timed joke. You marvel at the Empress's skill, weaving her own web with careful questions and gentle flattery, her eyes always missing nothing. Sometimes the networks turn truly bizarre. You hear tales of messages hidden in pastry, news carried by pet songbirds, and a legendary instance where a lost slipper turned out to contain the draft of an imperial edict. You smile at the creativity, and also at the knowledge that the palace will always find new ways to whisper, no matter how tightly the doors are closed. At day's end, you retreat to your room, ears still buzzing with a day's worth of half-truths. You know that in the Forbidden City, your safety depends as much on what you know as what you do, and that every alliance, every whisper, is both a lifeline and a snare. You wonder, as you drift to sleep, whose secret you'll carry tomorrow, and who will be listening when you whisper your own. It's a humid evening, the kind that makes silk stick to your skin and tempers fray more easily than usual. You're helping arrange lanterns for the night ceremony when the latest scandal sweeps through the court, like wildfire. At first you hear only a few furtive whispers, something about a love letter gone astray, a missing jade comb, or, most dramatically, a secret prophecy predicting doom for the unlucky owner of a certain yellow fan. In the palace, rumours aren't just idle chatter, they are currency, weapons, and sometimes shields for the clever. As you listen, you realise that palace scandals have a rhythm all their own. Sometimes they're sparked by jealousy or revenge, other times they emerge from the sheer boredom of court life, when everyone is looking for something, anything to liven up the monotony.
Mainstream historical fact. The Forbidden City's archives are filled with records of wild rumours, dramatic accusations, and court-wide panics, some with dire consequences, others that simply fizzle into new rounds of gossip. Tonight, the air is electric with stories. One attendant insists she saw a ghost in the moonlit corridor, its shadow lingering by the Empress Dowager's quarters. Another swears a tiger cub was found in the garden, a sign from heaven, while the kitchen staff mutters about a batch of dumplings that turned purple for no apparent reason. Historians still argue whether the most notorious scandals were rooted in real events or carefully orchestrated by ambitious players seeking to unseat rivals. You see how the wildest rumours gain momentum. A lost pet becomes evidence of a cursed household. A fainting spell is spun into a tale of forbidden love. A misheard joke explodes into accusations of treason. Sometimes the most outlandish stories are believed simply because no one dares to question them too loudly. You're reminded of the time an imperial astrologer announced that a comet would end the dynasty, only for the court to discover the comet was a trick of candlelight on a dusty window.
Fringe tidbit. A legendary case involved a consort accused of witchcraft after she was found with a jar of dried frogs, supposedly for medicinal use. The real scandal? The frogs belonged to a senior eunuch, who had been trying to start a lucrative side business, selling miracle cures.
The story grew wilder with every retelling, until the frogs themselves were said to sing curses at midnight. Some scandals never die, passed down from generation to generation, gaining new details with every telling. You notice how the court seems to delight in the most dramatic versions, adding ghostly apparitions, talking animals or secret trapdoors beneath the main hall. And yet behind every rumour there's a trace of real fear. What if the scandal is true? What if you're next? Historians debate whether these panics and rumours serve to distract the court from bigger issues or to flush out real conspiracies. You suspect the answer is both. Sometimes the drama is useful for those in power, sometimes it's a dangerous distraction that topples even the most careful players. You take note of the Empress's strategy. She listens without comment, lets the rumours run their course, and only steps in when the chaos threatens real harm. Sometimes she uses the scandal to her advantage, subtly guiding blame toward a rival or granting favour to a loyal supporter who weathered the storm. As the night deepens, the latest scandal begins to fade, replaced by fresh gossip, this time about a rare flower blooming in the wrong season, or a visiting envoy with a suspiciously large gift for the emperor. You realize that in the palace there will always be new stories, new fears, new legends. They are as much a part of life as the endless ceremonies and the glint of gold on a summer evening. You head to your chamber, half amused, half wary, knowing that tomorrow will bring new rumours, and with them, new chances to rise or fall. In a place where reality is always part theatre, you drift off to sleep, already wondering what tomorrow's scandal will be, and whether you'll be the one whispering or the one whispered about. The evening air hums with a different sort of excitement, the anticipation of performance. As dusk falls, the palace transforms. Courtyards bloom with lanterns, screens are set in place, and musicians tune their instruments under the watchful gaze of the Empress. Tonight, it's not politics or scandal that takes centre stage, but art. You're called to assist with the preparations for an imperial opera, a spectacle meant to honour the Empress, and perhaps distract the court from its most recent troubles.
Mainstream historical fact. Empresses in Chinese history often patronized the arts, commissioning lavish paintings, poems, and dramatic operas to project their image or subtly shape court opinion. The most powerful women sometimes became icons themselves, depicted in scrolls immortalized in operatic legends, or reimagined in plays that would be performed for centuries.
You watch as the performers slip into their costumes, faces painted into bold masks, sleeves trailing like rivers. Each role is carefully chosen. The loyal empress, the tragic consort, the wise dowager who always knows just when to speak. The stories themselves are a blend of myth, history, and pointed allegory, with enough hidden messages to keep even the most cynical officials guessing who's being honoured or mocked on stage.
Fringe tidbit, it's whispered that one empress, so delighted by her own portrayal in a famous opera, insisted it be performed every year on her birthday, ensuring her legend outlasted her lifetime.
The Empress sits in the place of honour, framed by silks and fans, a subtle smile playing at her lips. You catch her eye as the opening lines are sung, and for a moment you see her as the court sees her, a figure at once distant and dazzling, feared and adored. Around her the court watches with rapt attention, some moved to tears by the tragedy, others straining to decode the veiled political jabs in the dialogue. You notice how art blurs the boundaries between reality and legend. The audience gasps as the stage empress faces impossible trials, her wisdom and courage saving the day in ways that perhaps real empresses could only dream of. You see ministers exchanging glances during scenes of rebellion or reconciliation, and hear whispered commentary on which court scandal the story most closely resembles. In quieter corners of the palace, you've seen art used in smaller ways. A painted fan, gifted by a grateful artist, becomes a lucky charm. Poems penned by hand are tucked into sleeves as tokens of affection or apology. Some attendants mimic lines from favourite operas in the garden, their laughter echoing beneath the moonlit plum trees. Historians still argue whether the art served as a true escape for palace women, or simply another way to shape public opinion and maintain power. Did these performances give empresses a rare voice, or did they only reinforce old stereotypes, wrapping ambition in the trappings of legend? After the performance, you help clear the stage, collecting stray ribbons and still warm teacups. The palace is slow to return to its routine, as if everyone wants to linger a little longer in the glow of the story. You overhear a group of junior maids reenacting the climactic scene in the shadows, their voices echoing the strength and wit of the legendary empresses they so admire. Before bed, you slip into the library and run your fingers along a scroll painted centuries ago, the Empress, rendered with a sly smile and a knowing tilt of the head. You imagine her stepping from the silk alive for just a moment in the lamplight, and wonder what she would think of the way her story is told tonight.
As sleep comes, you realize that in the palace, art is never just art. It is legacy, weapon, comfort, and mask, all at once, blurring the lines between history, myth, and the everyday lives of women who dared to claim a stage of their own. It is late autumn, and a grey hush settles over the palace. The leaves in the imperial gardens,
turn the color of faded silk banners, and the air feels thick with endings. Today you walk more slowly, as if the world itself is waiting for something to change. The word passes quietly from one corridor to the next. The last empress prepares for her final audience. The dynasty is trembling, and you sense history tilting beneath your feet. The palace, always a place of secrets and survival, now feels like a fortress under siege. Even the servants move with a kind of sorrow, as if mourning the end of an era before it truly arrives. You catch glimpses of the last empress, once a figure of effortless authority, now shadowed by worry. Her robes are still beautiful, but you see how her hands tremble as she accepts tribute, how her eyes linger on the faces of loyal attendants, searching for comfort in a sea of uncertainty. Mainstream historical fact, as the imperial dynasties collapsed, the last empresses often found themselves at the center of political upheaval. Caught between loyalty to their family, their people, and the inexorable tide of revolution. Some negotiated with foreign powers, some tried to hold the crumbling palace together with a kind word or a bold decree. Historians still argue whether these final acts of leadership were heroic or futile, if they delayed the inevitable or made the loss even more profound.
You help gather possessions, calligraphy scrolls, a favorite fan, a small box of childhood keepsakes. There's an eerie calm to the preparations, an unspoken understanding that the rituals of palace life, so carefully observed for generations, will soon fade into memory.
You overhear senior eunuchs whispering about what should be preserved, what can be carried into exile, what must be left behind to avoid trouble with the new regime. Fringe tidbit, it's rumored that in the final days, some empresses hid coded messages inside embroidered pillowcases, hoping to preserve family secrets for a time when it might be safe to remember. The last audience arrives. The empress sits, regal but impossibly fragile, as ministers and family members bow low. Some beg for guidance. Others quietly plan their exit strategies. You see the strain behind her. Measured words, she comforts the frightened, thanks the loyal, and promises with a smile both brave and heartbreaking that the dynasty's spirit will outlast its walls. The palace gates soon open not for a festival but for revolutionaries, soldiers, and eventually the foreign diplomats who write the last lines of the empire's story. You watch as the empress, head held high, walks out of the only home she has ever known. Some say she later lived quietly, her days filled with gardening and poetry. Others claim she never truly escaped the shadows of her former life. Historians still debate whether the last empresses went willingly or under protest, if their final years were marked by dignity or despair. You wonder how it must feel to carry so much history within yourself, to be the last keeper of vanished rituals, old stories, and the burdens of countless generations. That night, the palace feels emptier than ever, as if the walls themselves are listening for voices that will never return. You sit in your chamber, candle guttering in the autumn breeze, and realize that you have witnessed the twilight of an entire world. The end is not just a closing of gates, but the passing of memory, an invitation to remember, to mourn, and perhaps one day to begin again. The palace stands quiet, draped in soft morning light. The world outside its walls has changed, but within, the air still holds a trace of incense, the scent of distant feasts, the hush of silk slippers on ancient stones. As you move through the empty corridors, you realize the legacy of the empresses is everywhere, in the stories told by the last attendants, in the faded murals on cold walls, and in the tiny rituals that linger even after the throne itself is gone. You walk past the abandoned audience hall, sunlight pooling on the jade floor. Here, the laughter of princesses, the stern words of dowagers, the whispered hopes of concubines still seem to echo, woven into the very foundation. You pause, running your hand along a carved pillar, thinking of all the women who stood where you stand now, some remembered in opera and scroll, others known only to the ghosts who haunt the quiet corners. Mainstream historical fact: the influence of Chinese empresses endures well beyond the fall of the last dynasty. Their policies, patronage of the arts, and strategies for survival have shaped not just the court, but the traditions and stories of families across the country. Even now, their names spark debates, their legacies woven into films, novels, and the grand sweep of history itself. Try and see how their power ripples outward, the way a festival is celebrated, a poem recited, a jade hairpin passed down. These are the living memory of women who reigned from behind the curtain, who commanded armies with a single gesture, or brought peace with a whispered word. Fringe tidbit: in some rural villages, local festivals still feature songs said to have been composed by empresses, their lyrics carried from court to countryside, outlasting even the emperors they once stood beside. Historians still argue whether the power of these women was a blessing or a burden, if their strength set examples, or simply preserved the old order in subtler ways.
You think of Wu Zishan, her shadow both inspiring and intimidating, and the nameless empresses who faced exile with silent dignity. Each left an imprint, a policy, a painting, a legend, or just the memory of laughter in a long-forgotten garden. You step into the garden one last time, where dew glistens on bamboo leaves and the carp swim lazy circles. In this gentle morning, you feel the full weight of their stories: triumph, heartbreak, resilience, and most of all, the unending ability to adapt. As the world turns outside, the Forbidden City fades from power, but the lessons of the empresses remain, carried forward by anyone who chooses cleverness over cruelty, patience over pride, and hope in the face of impossible odds. Now, as the palace slips deeper into memory, you slow your steps, letting the hush of early morning ease every breath. The stones beneath your feet are cool, the gardens touched with silver mist, the world hushed and kind. You feel the day's tension melt away, replaced by a gentle warmth, a sense of continuity stretching far beyond your own story. With each step, your worries fade, dissolving into the steady rhythm of a life lived in harmony with tradition and change. You think of all those who walked here before, empresses forging new paths, consorts finding courage in small acts, servants carrying secrets and kindness through generations. The lessons of their lives: adaptability, quiet strength, the power of listening, settle softly over you like the finest silk blanket. The world beyond the palace gates beckons, wide and unknown, but for now you remain here, savouring the last glimmer of lantern light, the last echo of a whispered poem.
You are not alone. The wisdom of countless women, woven through centuries, keeps you company. With every gentle breeze, you hear their stories, a lullaby for restless hearts, a gentle promise that history, for all its turbulence, will hold you safe.
You nestle into the softest corner of memory, closing your eyes to the soft hum of distant music, and allow sleep to find you, calm and content. The power and legacy of the empresses cradle you, easing you toward dreams where hope lingers, and history sings in a quiet, reassuring voice. Good night and sweet dreams.